But I'm so honored to be here. My husband and I have traveled India, as you'll see, since 1986, which I think it's the first year we came to Bangalore, when it was a garden city full of bungalows, and we came for the Science Museum, actually. And, well, Pratiti and I met in a queue in Anuki. Maybe some 8 years ago, Pratiti? 10 years ago. And we immediately got on. And then, because I show in New York, and Pratiti was moving between New York and here, we kind of bumped into each other. So it was fabulous, and I'm really thrilled to be here. So I'm going to start. It's always the most difficult thing, is starting. So I'm going to press this button here and hope that it works. So this is what it's all about. It's clay, obviously. And the planet actually is making more every day than we can really use. Although sometimes in regions it's difficult to find, but essentially it is brother and sister to stone and sand. It's powdered stone in essence, glued together with the adhesive qualities of water. And its versatility is absolutely stunning. I've been doing it since I was 13, I'm 61, and I'm still learning all the time. Had an amazing trip in Bangalore of the tile factories, and I'm so looking forward to showing you your heritage, which is just down the road, really, in the Bangalore tile factories. But this is it. There's actually some dog hair there, I noticed. I have a studio dog who's a star of screen. Whenever we have photos taken in the studio, he always sort of walks in and sits down. And even here, he has come into the photo, I noticed the other day. And really, clay is this wondrous thing. When I was 12 years old, I was in a rough government school with a fantastic arts policy. England had an amazing arts policy in the 70s. And we all did woodwork, metalwork, pottery, cooking, sewing as a matter of the main timetable. And the creativity that instilled has really come through to my generation of craft makers in England, which is very, very fertile. And really, I work very simply. Every child in England who studies pottery studies my work. And apart from hopefully them enjoying it and them enjoying the optimistic sense of it, it's quite simple to study my work because it's nature. You can go to the supermarket if you're an urban child and you can buy a pineapple, or the teacher can, or a pumpkin. And also I use very simple tools. I started out as a student with no money for equipment, and I evolved my technique through not having equipment. And I've maintained that now for 30 years. So, that's it, the simple tools, taken care of lovingly at the end of every single day. Very simple. And essentially, I work in 3 areas of ceramics. It's such a vast subject. When I meet children or families, I always sit at the dinner table, I say, name 20 things every day that you use with clay. It's in your toothpaste, it's in your makeup. You have the sharpest knives in the world made of clay. There's a car engine made of clay. There's a Swiss watch, and the only part that isn't clay is the jewel and the glass face. Every single part of it. It's this incredible, versatile material. And really, I work in 3 areas of this. I've had to sort of hone it down, really, because I get far too excited. Decorative arts, which are really my own indulgence as an artist, to look at vegetables, to look at nature, to think about the abstract sense of nature or the real figurative sense of nature, to look at a pineapple or a blackberry or a pumpkin, or to think about the abstract sense of growth and looking at crystals and water and the way it is so magical. And that's my indulgence, if you like. And that I have an exclusive world art dealer who deals in those pieces. I make maybe 20 or 30 major pieces a year, and he deals with them exclusively and shows them at art fairs in America, in New York, once a year or twice a year, and in Holland and in England at the main fine art fairs, really. But also I work with Glaze Research. I'm fascinated by the technology of glazes and the possibilities of color. And I'm constantly working and testing glazes, and you'll see this in a minute. And the other area, to balance the decadence and the labor intensity and therefore expensiveness of the decorative arts, which is very exclusive, I work on public art. And so over the last 30 years, I've made some 20 projects for schools, hospitals, libraries, parks, and with architects, and therefore the public domain, where it's free for all. And so that means I'm smiling all the time, because I have a very balanced life and a very fulfilled life. And I thank clay for that, actually. So here we go. So here are some of the decorative art pots. This was a little studio. My husband and I decided to go and live in Barcelona to teach our daughter a third language. You'll hear about it in a minute. So this is a dungeon in Barcelona in the Gothic Quarter near the Picasso Museum. And we set up, as you can see, it's quite temporary, but there are the molds underneath which I make the work. And these are half-finished pieces that we're working towards a show that was then shipped to England and then shipped to America. And here are some of the pieces. This is an exhibition on Dover Street, just off Piccadilly, some years back, of large, exuberant pieces. So this is really where my heart lies. I suppose if I didn't have a social or an awareness of community, I think I'd just shut myself away and do this. But of course, it's so lovely and so rewarding to be work within communities and to help once you've received something to give back. So these are some of I call them my fancy pots. And they are placed in 40 plus museums around the world, including the Victoria and Albert Museum and New York Museum and Los Angeles Museum and in Limoges in France. And these pieces stand as symbolism for joy and optimism. My objective is to make beautiful objects that will move people in the stomach region. It's difficult to explain after I die, because these things, they've just unearthed evidence of ceramics 50,000 years old now. They're finding older and older pieces and managing to locate it. So I hope this will shine for me, really. A pumpkin is a symbol of fertility and fecundity, and this little smoky stem, as if it's a spiral of smoke, in Chinese symbolism, smoke coming out of a thing means that life is improving. And in amongst the decorative arts and the fancy pots, my art dealer, who's world exclusive, I've worked with him for 23 years now, he gives me projects to keep me out of trouble. He likes to keep me busy and focused. And this is Waddesdon Manor, which is his favorite place in England. It's a Rothschild house, and Rothschild are great collectors, addicted collectors. And so this house, which was a party house, but used only really for parties, built in about 1890s, 1898. It's a French chateau built outside London for parties by the Rothschild. And sadly, his wife and first child died at childbirth. And he was lonely, and he was so sad that he put all his energy into building this house. And so I was invited. In fact, I slept nobody's ever really lived in this house. There have never been children born in the house. It's this sort of showcase, actually. But these two windows, that's the curator's flat with a bathroom with a roll-top bath. And I slept in there and I studied. They gave me a month's finance to stop all work and have all my studio study the things in the house. And I'd had a big show in the grounds of 55 pieces and a lovely catalogue, and people came from all over the world. Waddesdon Manor has the biggest collection of French porcelain Sèvres in the world. So here it is at Waddesdon, and Waddesdon was built by Ferdinand, Baron Ferdinand, this gentleman you can see in the picture at the back. And I found myself, as I was making pots inspired by the house, I found that I was making portraits of Ferdinand, and when he died, his sister Alice looked after the house for 30 years. And so these two pieces are actually Ferdinand and Alice in portrait. Alice loved topiary and flowers, and she loved de la Fosse architectural details, and she loved plants. He had this garden called Ethrop. And Ferdinand, he liked to fancy dress. He had fancy dress parties. There was a picture of him as a wizard, and he collected boxes. And he also opened an aviary, which is still England's second most successful aviary in breeding rare birds, and he opened an aviary at Waddesdon. And the whole aviary is covered in real gold leaf outside. It's a very decadent and opulent and rich collection of things. And it's open with the National Trust. It was gifted to the National Trust in the 60s, but the Rothschilds still run it. And you can see the shapes. These are pots with lids. They have covers. And you can see the shapes of the roofs here on the house relate to the covers on the pots. And when I had the show, I thought maybe that during the show, the Rothschild would buy one or two pieces from the show and put them in their foundation in the grounds. They have an amazing foundation. They, in fact, purchased the two of these, and they're in the house now, which almost seems wrong, really, because the house is a museum of pieces from then. There's very few interventions of modern art. But the Rothschilds were so moved by these pieces, they felt they so described the characters themselves that I really did study that they stand in the house and they're moved around the house. And so there's Ferdinand and there is Alice. Evidently, Alice told Queen Victoria to keep off her grass because she was so garden proud. And dear Ferdinand, a very sad character, and very, very passionate about collecting. The British Museum in London has a Rothschild room full of the gold treasures that he collected that are beyond value, really. So, here we have the show that I did, and you can see in the distance the pots. These are my fancy pots, if you like. This big estate vase on the left was, Waddesdon is on the top of a hill, so this is based on the maps of Waddesdon. I could talk just for an hour about this project. I'm not going to, but this really shows you the scrapbooks and the studying of things that I made. And really, it was being put in Waddesdon. I couldn't dream of things that I was going to make. I know I will make pumpkins for the rest of my life, but I had no idea that I was going to make these portraits of these great characters. And it was a great honor. And this is the garden at Ethrop, which is the Rothschilds' personal garden. And they have a stage that has auriculas and different plants in different times of the year. And I was there for the pumpkin stage. And this is just for the Rothschilds. They use all the fruits and vegetables from Ethrop Garden. You can visit twice a year their private gardens, and then they distribute the vegetables and fruits to everybody who works on the estate, and the local charities and their friends have beautiful organic boxes in London delivered. It's a very, very beautiful and special place. And I cast real vegetables from Ethrop and joined them together to make this strange bowl. It was a very experimental time, and I studied maps of the area. Before the house was built, there were these lovely maps showing the fields, and I took images of the trees from the maps and made these little clay trees, and here are the estate vases, which you really, as you go to Waddesdon, you climb the hill in a little bus. You have to park at the bottom. I recommend it. If any of you go to London, it's a day trip, and it's the most wonderful thing. And this is my studio. One of the things I did, there was the most beautiful passementerie at Waddesdon, which is the tassels and really lovely silk twisted really fringes on curtains and furniture, and I was very taken by them. They were French from Lyon, 18th century, beautiful passementerie, and I started knotting and twisting, and you can see this piece at the front is trying to do the impossible with clay, which is knotting and twisting. And there are the estate vases being coiled, and me watching Enrique, one of my assistants. This is more of the knotting and twisting. And in fact, it was doing the impossible with clay. It's very difficult to knot clay without it splitting. The potters amongst you will know that. So I challenge you to roll clay so soft that you can't hardly hold it. It's collapsing like cream in your hand, and then knot it within seconds. We had great fun doing these. And we studied architecturally, all the details in the house and all the fabrics. And actually, over the years, this is a recent piece, maybe 2 or 3 years old, whereas the other pieces are 6 years old. It sort of led into me doing basket work. So the twisting and looking at cloth led me into doing these more recent pieces. And these are more details from the portico on the front door of the house. And also in the past, I've been put in the Arts and Crafts House by Bailey Scott up on Lake Windermere, and studying arts and crafts details, and these are details from the wallpapers in the house. So it's the most wonderful thing to be inspired by other people's design, which I love doing. And this was a show, and this is the wallpaper, and this is the rowan berry, which is a very arts and crafts, turn of the century pattern. I was also put into Welbeck, which is a famous man who had terrible psoriasis on his skin, and he didn't like people seeing him. So he built the underground tunnels to go and visit all his workers on the estate. It's a very strange story of Welbeck in Sherwood Forest. This is an underground ballroom. It's half underground, and there was a lift at the end to take horse and carriage down in a lift. So it's a very so you can understand why I talk about the opulence of the things that I've studied, and then I work in the public sector. And this is another piece of a more recent piece of my work, which is also studying nature, but it's nature in the abstract, or nature in the crystal. I've been studying all the crystal formations in the Natural History Museum and looking at crystals. So this looks very different to my pumpkins and artichokes and pineapples, but actually the root of it is the same. It's the abstract sense of nature. And I love doing these. It's been a new revelation not to be making curvy, soft things, very experimental pieces. And here's the family of pieces, ready on the floor, ready for a delivery to go to a show somewhere. And the area that I work in and adore and find so exciting is glaze technology. There's the dog. He's actually up on the table next to a delicate pot. But I have this library. I have the largest glaze archive of crystalline glazes high-fired in England, if not the world, dare I say it. And I have chests and chests of research. Every glaze color has a recipe, like a cake has a recipe. So these buckets have the different colored glazes mixed and stirred with water, and I paint them on. And this is the library, some of the library of color reference. So I can have interior designers or architects, or I can myself use the palette of color. The Glaze Research really feeds everything that I do. And so I have many interns, and I have assistants, and I have workshop managers. And when I come away like this, and I have 3 or 4, in fact, I have to go to France and then Holland when I get back, 5 weeks of absence from 3 studios, employing 13 people, half a week each. So I set them glaze testing. We set programs, and so they'll be testing while I'm away. So I'm going back, very excited to see what they've been doing. And here are the tests. My speciality is crystalline glazes. You see on the left here? I grow crystals on the surface of the pots during the cooling cycle of the firing in the kiln. And it's simulating volcanic activity. So in the same way as a diamond or an emerald grows in the Earth's crust due to heating and cooling and mixing of ingredients, I simulate that and grow crystals on the surface of my pot. So it's sort of an extra magic, if you like. Yeah, it's really fascinating science and chemistry. So the job really includes all sorts of a spectrum. So if I'm not in a creative mood, I can very much be a scientist and a chemist. And I can also encourage that in my assistants. You can see little crystals sitting in the green. So this is a palette, which is a blend between cobalt and copper in a clear glaze. And they have reference numbers at the top, and I have a very beautiful directory in my studio, in duplicate in my studios. So I can refer to it and mix colors as I make. And here are the crystals. Every crystal has to be seeded by a microscopic speck of clay, and the glazes run down the pots, drag these specks off the surface of the pot, and the crystals seed and grow. And the longer you cool, the bigger the crystals you get. It's a fascinating, fascinating science. I never really know what I'm getting. And this takes us into the large-scale work. I love making large pieces. The physicality of it is really mesmerizing. This weighed 1/3 of a ton, and it was for Manchester City Art Gallery to welcome people into the gallery in Manchester. And a pineapple is a symbol of hospitality and prosperity and friendship, and so it was very logical. Oh, my voice. I gave a talk last night. I don't know, I know some of the students are here today, and I talked myself dry. But here we are, big pots. And really, it's logical when you make, it's very hard to sell a big pot. You know, not so many people have got houses, especially in England, that can hold a big pot. So it was very logical to start placing them in public spaces. Hotels, obviously, and restaurants are a choice, but really that's kind of dealing with the same clientele and collectors who buy my work through Adrian Sassoon, my art dealer. So it was a logical thing. Actually, this wasn't so long ago, but I'm so invigorated by my pots that I kind of look younger when I'm next to them. I was really shocked when I saw the picture. This is a mother and daughter. These were made for the Old Bailey law courts, and they have symbols of strength, stability, industry, and justice on them and inside them, and there's writing inside. And this is the public art. So I was asked by Lee Valley in Hackney, a very rough park, they were very brave to invite me, to make something that would teach the children about freshwater fish, because this was a river next door, and this is a filter bed. So I did English freshwater fish jumping out. So school children came to the park and they study English freshwater fish at the same time as enjoying art, and we did lots of land art with them and things like that. And this is something that I've developed since my daughter was born. She's 22 now, nearly 23. But I love telling her stories from my throat, improvised stories. Sometimes she still asks for them. But essentially, this is a storytelling room. The idea to sit by a pineapple fireplace and sit on a pumpkin and be told stories and drink hot chocolate. And, you know, so this was the first of a piece. This was for a museum of the English interior in London, and it's a storytelling room. And from that, I developed more public art pieces. This is a children's library in Brighton, and it's called The Wall of 1,000 Stories. And the idea is that you pick 3 things: a fried egg, a tree, and a dinosaur, say, as you can see there. And the parents or the carers improvise storytelling with the children. So it's public art, but at the same time it's interactive. And in fact, the brief was that it had to be an interactive piece. And so the logical thing was, I was telling my daughter stories at the time, and so I really used that sort of thing to build. And I designed it for the makers amongst you here who can only afford a small kiln, and I have a large kiln, obviously, for the large pots, but this was all made in quite a small electric top loader. And so I designed it especially that I could make it in this small kiln and I tend to move a lot. We have a house in France, so I was able to make it in France and drive it in the back of our car in a few journeys up to London and deliver it and hang it. Public art is actually 5% inspiration, 95% perspiration. Every piece that was hanging on that wall, if it was to fall, it could kill a child. They were 8 to 10 kilos, big pieces about the size of this tabletop. So they had to be engineered. The hanging of them had to be engineered with 3 mechanisms to hold it. So if one failed, the other failed, the other failed. In fact, a few people have tried to steal the pieces and prize them off the wall with crowbars because they know my work is valuable in the decorative art sector. And they haven't been able to get them off. They've been caught trying to get them. So this is really talking about India. This is you know what this is. This is outside of a village primary school. And this is teaching for the children in primary school. But you can actually see the influence of that, actually, I think, to that. It's a sort of purification and a simplification of symbols. And here they are, the symbols. And the librarian gave me different subjects to show to the kids. And this is another piece. This is in a shopping centre, actually. This time I sold my soul to the devil. I got loads of money for this. Public art, I normally balance the cost with the commission value, but this is in a shopping centre, and the teapot at the top whistles and steams every hour. And it cost more to make it do that, linked to a satellite clock, than it did to make the piece. 4 tons, cantilevered very high up. So again, the engineering was huge. And this is another piece. This is more storytelling, opposite a school in a very rough area of Brighton. I was asked by American Express to do something on the backside of their offices. So it was a very ugly road, actually, a very poor road. And the council was so pleased with my work that they actually made a beautiful pavement that wasn't there before. And there's a school opposite. And I worked with the community, with 300 people in the community, with my team. Every child made a piece that's embedded in that wall. And there are sort of symbols hidden in the wall. This is Joe, who is putting all these on. They're like tiles, really. But there are little storytelling things. There's a train hidden in it. So it's like a hidden jigsaw puzzle game, storytelling thing. And this is my final big piece of public art. It's Savile Row in London, in Mayfair, and Conduit Street on the corner, the very famous tailoring street. And this is a building that I worked with architects. They called me in right at the beginning, before the building was designed, and we worked together to design a hanging facade. It was 11 tons of clay, mechanically hung on the walls, and it's crystalline. So much like a Savile Row suit is sharp and beautiful and draws you in, and the quality of it resounds with you for a long time, and obviously a Savile Row suit or a Savile Row pair of shoes should last you for life. Savile Row shoes are guaranteed for life, I believe. I had to guarantee this for 20 years, and we had to make 11,000 tiles. So this is the storing of the tiles. There's Helen, my workshop manager, and the technician at the back who helped me glaze all these tiles, and the architect at the front. We spent £20,000 on crates to store them. It was amazing. It was a big thing. We had to. It was £1.5 million budget. And my fee was obviously not that much, but I had to spend 10% of my fee on lawyers to make contracts sound, so that if something went wrong, they couldn't come and litigate against me. So it was a really great learning curve. I had to form a limited company, and there's a black building and a white building with blue crystals. And the idea was that it was to fit in with Mayfair and not jump out at you, but to be, there's a lot of black stone and white stone in Mayfair. And here is the plans with the architects. And really, that's the sort of basis of the three things that I do. There's actually a fourth thing, actually. I'm very active now with charitable work, trying to get kids at school, impoverished and marginalized kids, to experience pottery, because that's what I did in quite a rough school in Bristol. So I'm very involved with that. Probably about 20% of my working time is doing that on a voluntary basis. But essentially, this talk is called Moving, Flowing, and Running. I move around the world. My husband and I made a pledge that we work like mad. So we would take 2 months a year off, or 6 weeks a year off, and travel, moving around the world, being inspired. Flowing is about flowing the glazes, which you're going to see, and running is about running workshops and being part of a very big community of potters. And my community is getting bigger, having visited India so many times and been very active with that recently. So here we are moving around the world. This is quite an old map, actually. We've actually been into Bhopal and been up to Chanderi, and we've since been to Calcutta and then over to Orcha. But this is sort of showing you the sort of routes that we take with a backpack with my daughter. She's traveled with us since she was 10 months old in India. And we just used to move around in the old days with a backpack, and now we have a wheelie case. And it's just the most wonderful thing. I kept travel diaries because I couldn't work when I was traveling. I didn't have my studio or my kilns with me, so I used to paint. So I'd paint these experiences. There's Kathakali dancing on the left. This is a trip to Udaipur, and this is more Kathakali. I'm very intrigued by the Teyams in Costa Malabari. We just visited some Teyams because it's Teyam season. And these are potters. Not very good photos of my travel diaries. They're tiny little watercolor books. I've got them in my study, and there's a cow with its shell on the front. That was in Mudamalai. When you paint something and you're really painting, I painted right with the cow sort of nudging its nose on my lap. You remember it as if it was yesterday. Yeah, I do. So, and these are the sort of influences that India have had. Of course, the Taj. Of course, the most beautiful, exquisite flower carving I have ever seen. And you saw the Blackwell flowers from the White Room and the rowan berries. There's a touch of this I would like to hope that I could sculpt as clearly as that. The most gorgeous carving, and really it's the purity of the line in India that really inspires me to concentrate and focus. And so I go back to England and make things from the things that I've seen. This is using earthenware glazes. I don't really use these glazes anymore, but it shows the sort of essence of this giant seed, like a rugby ball, that we found on a beach traveling down from Bombay on the coast to Goa, big palm seed, which I carried around with me painting. And I collect seeds, and I collect plants, and I study at Kew. Kew Gardens have recently invited me to study and look at their old seed catalogues, very beautiful seed catalogues from the 1800s, and real seeds. This is half a rudraksha, a moon rudra, that's split in half, and I made it. And this is Nandi. And it's these lovely lines of decoration that actually relate to English ceramics and to Dalton and Minton, which are sprigged ceramics with these little emblems like brooches on. And really it's these lines of detail and the purity of the line of that's Chamundi Hill, isn't it? And the line and the purity of the drawing around the eye or the ear, this clarity of line that's just, I find, absolutely extraordinary. And recently I brought some of my team up to the first ever ceramic triennale in Jaipur. And I think they're going to, it's every 3 years, obviously, it's a triennale. They're going to have another one either in Bhopal or here next year. And I brought my team to experience India for the first time. And we set up a workshop where we taught children. Here we are on the move, a lot of them who I work very closely with in England. And we taught children from village schools, from private schools. We taught grown-up students and anybody who wanted to come. We set up this temporary studio and we started making pots. These are the things that we made with village children. And these are the pots that inspired them. Of course, you recognize all these traditional, beautiful forms. These are my girls. I have one child. I always thought I'd have lots. So my team, some of them have been with me for many years, are really family. I was very happy to show them. This is a place in Gujarat. I think the earthquake knocked it down. I'm not sure. I haven't been back to find it. But we sat here in this place. It was very derelict. There were dogs there that seemed very wild, and it wasn't a touristed area. It was between Budge going down to Diu, and we got off a bus and found this place. We sat there all day, and I loved it. And I didn't really take home the idea of going home and doing things, but years later, I found myself doing things like this. This is a very large piece. It's in the Victoria and Albert Museum in the ceramics department there, if you go and see it. She's called Snow Lady Gord. And it's as if she's fizzing with energy. And it's also as if she's wearing a dress. There's a great Japanese artist who just does dots on everything, and I really like her work. And so a pot is like a person. It has poise, it has a belly, a foot, a shoulder, a lip, and it actually has a stance. And different nations have different characteristics of pots. And so this is very much a lady, I thought, with white glaze. And this was directly influenced by being on the trains in India and seeing the ladies get up out of the fields and fix their shawls over their heads. There's this great movement where they fix it. You know, they must all slip down when they're working, and they sort of flick it on and put it back on, or cover their face when they don't want you to see them, or various things. So this is very much about a shawl winding up around a body, although you wouldn't really think it to see it. Obviously, all artists have a language and a vocabulary that's very personal, so I'm not expecting people to realize that. And this is the fireworks from Kannur on New Year's Eve, and I got the label off the packet and realized that it was really very much about the essence of the atom. I love nature, and of course the root of all nature is the atom. So it's this explosive, fantastic graphic that I adore about Indian things. And there it is, the sort of atom exploding. It's also the monsoon. We came to a wedding in Kannur, some Indian friends invited us, and we saw these great monsoon clouds rolling in off the sea towards the beach house where we were staying. And so these are the clouds, really, the grey, blue clouds. And the glaze actually drips through midair onto the skirt of the pot. So these drips fall and get caught here on the skirt. So my work's very much about showing the true nature of the material during the process of making or firing. And that's a garniture inspired by French porcelain that my art dealer is very interested in himself. And here's some more rooftops. This is the rooftop in Gujarat again. Here it is on a covered pineapple, strange blackberry, strange twig-lidded pot. So sometimes I like to just let things flow with the creative process. So when I started this pot, I had no idea what I was going to do by covering it. A lot of fashion designers collect my clothes and collect my pots. And a lot of fashion designers collect pots generally because the pot is like a body, and the fashion designer dresses a body, and decorative artists often dress a pot. There's this very lovely parallel, and that's very exciting to think about fashion. And this is obviously Chola bronze. We transfixed in Trichy and Tanjavur of them. I don't know if they're still there, in a very dark room, so you can hardly see them. And they had a great Chola exhibition in London about 15 years ago. But it's this purity of line that is just beyond bliss as a maker for me to see. How that's the maker talking across centuries to other people. And that fascinates me. And this is, forgive me, Gomneswara, Sevrang Belagon. Savrang Belagon. Anyway, I've been to visit him 5 times. You'd think I could pronounce his name better. But his toenail. I go up climb the top of that stone hill barefoot, those hot stones, and just sort of collapse in front of him because he's so extraordinarily beautiful. He's my favorite, I think. Anyway, and when I'm making these pieces, this is a lotus pot, and this is a curving pumpkin stem that might take 12 hours to carve that stem and to smooth it and have it on my lap and whittle it very gently and lovingly. It's really remembering the Chola bronze and remembering Gomneswara and trying to meditate and do that line and be respectful to that line. And I'm sort of frightened of doing the pumpkin. The pumpkin sells so well. So my art dealers always like, when are you going to do another pumpkin? I won't do a pumpkin just for the money. And so when I do actually turn around to do it, I make sure I savor the focus and concentration that I have to really maintain to make sure that that stem works from all angles. It's a lovely, lovely thing to do. The potter's amongst you to concentrate on refining something with hacksaw blades and wooden tools and polishing and working it back is a lovely meditation. Here's his hand. I don't know if any of you have noticed his finger's short on his left hand. I don't know if it must have broken. I was imagining them working it, but he has a short finger. But yeah, he's gorgeous. And there's that gourd with the leaf. This is a spice box from Cochin, and we bought that spice box. When we go back to Cochin, the antique dealers still remember us in this spice box because it was such a special object. It was £70 back in the 80s. And we refused to buy it. We didn't have much money. It seemed so lot. It was a lot in the 80s, but we had to go back the next day and get it. But there's the front cover of my book of pots that Pratiti referred to, and you can see there's a direct parallel to the Indian object. I think, it's a spice box, carved from one piece of wood. And I still use it. My art dealer allows me to have open days once a year to make contact with the different kind of community that he communicates with. And I make small pieces, especially for sale to my local residents. And that's the money box that when people buy things that we put all the money in. It's great. And I collect pieces as I go around. There's less of them these days. Of course, plastic is the dreaded thing, and we're trying not to use plastic. But over the years, I raid toy boxes or bought them on the street side and collected things, and they really inform the work in a strange way. Not valuable things, but still very charming, very sweet, made with plastic, so they had to come out of a mold, so when you make with clay and you cast the real thing or model a similar thing, it just pops out in the same way. So the process of making is something that feeds it. And this is something that I just adore about India. People say, why do we keep going back? There's this incredible respect for everything, for nature. These are rocks, obviously, and this was in Ujjain, and it's just the most, I find it very funny, and I try not myself to be too serious about a lot of the things that I make. I like them to have a childlike quality sometimes, but at the same time, it's so deeply respectful of the most abstract and strange thing. I don't actually understand what these are. I think it's worshipping this God of nature, I don't know. Maybe some of you can tell me afterwards. But really, I find this, and this was just in a little shelter at the side of the road, fascinating. And I try to, it's that wonder and not really understanding. This is in Sanchi. This is a fallen down column in Sanchi. Here's some of the passementerie from Waddesdon. And you can see there's a parallel across time, across space, across craft of the same forms being used by people. And I find the passementerie are very much like little pots. And these are I just love these pillars. The beautiful pillars in Badami in the cave temples are like pot upon pot upon pot stacked in a great totem pole. And here's the knotting and the twisting of the clay and the experimenting that Waddesdon allowed me to do. And this is a Varatha. Varatha, I think? Yeah. Varatha. And this was just between Sanchi and Chanderi. We went with some French academic historians, and they took us to really obscure sites. This is in the middle of fields. These are some people who came to see what we were looking at. And this ancient, they don't really know quite how ancient they are, but the fact that they're covered in these sprigs, which relates to Stoke-on-Trent pottery, to Dalton and Minton pottery, it's covered in this repeat pattern, much like my estate vases for Waddesdon had these trees over and over. And I've done lots of pieces where the pots are covered in tiny things. And here's the teyam. And there's this repetition, the same with the teyam, this brilliant craft. The costumes and the makeup is so finely crafted, in excess actually, because the teyam is quite quick and it's often in the dark and through the night and with fire. And a lot of these costumes, this halo of cream color around the outside is fresh leaves that have been cut, which will go brown within a few hours. It needn't be as fine as it is. I'm fascinated about it. I'm trying to find where they actually make the costumes with the wool and the pieces of cheap metal and the fabrics. But this teyam and this repetition of craft and the sort of tribal and ritual side of it, I find entrancing. So we were there, and you see these daisies here. These lovely flowers. Those are temporary flowers that will go brown because they're cut from fresh leaves. And it's just this extraordinary thing. And you can see the influence on my work here. These are porcelain daisies that have been cut with little cutters that are actually for making wedding cake decorations in England. You can get them in different sizes. And these are porcelain cut, every single one cut on the back, almost the size of a pinhead, the small one, and stuck onto the pot. This is a tiny pot like this size. And it's the intricacy and the memory of these. This is a Haveli in Ahmedabad. We went to the music festival. I'm sure some of you have seen them. There we are on the move. And here are these flowers. Here's this fantastic repetition. And of course, you have flowers in the hair and flowers at temples, flowers on the strings of flowers that smell so sweet when you're on the buses and ladies' hair. And here it is that's a big pumpkin. It took a month to do that piece. Very difficult to make it because once they're on, the makers amongst you can't spray it to keep it wet because the flowers are so fine they disintegrate. So we had to work in a humid room and make a humid cabinet and work. We actually uncovered that, but we were working through little windows of plastic because we couldn't expose the whole thing while we were making it. And the underside is all covered, first of all, with flowers. I love sewing and repetition and the meditation of repetition. And so to spend a month with one of my assistants doing that is just the most gorgeous thing. And there are the flowers in the hair. This is the wedding we came to during monsoon in Kannur, Naveed and Shabna. But it was just this joy of flower. And this has always fascinated me. I've always photographed village pots, always, always, always. And now I think with the rise of studio pottery in India, there's this strange confusion between the artisan pots that are very inexpensive and very throwaway, and the studio pottery that's rising up now because, in the last 10 or 15 years, there's been a huge beginning of an appreciation of studio pottery. And obviously the price line is very different, and the general public, and even the makers themselves, there's this sort of confusion. And I've been working with KVIC this trip down in Kanyakumari, training village potters who are on training courses, learning jigajolli, which is a sort of semi-automated throwing technique, and trying to show them how it's very strange that I make these fancy pots that cost tens of thousands of pounds, and they're making things for 300 rupees. But yet we're finding a place, and I've been showing them how to decorate very simply with stamps that are relevant to them. I'm very interested in trying to combine and show everybody I don't know, but anyway, I'm loving working with KVIC. And this is the flowing. This is the flowing of the glazes. Here is a drip of glaze. So my glaze is really difficult to use because it drips off the pots during the firing, and the pieces have to be raised up on stilts during the firing to stop them sticking to the ground. And this is the extent to which it drips. But of course, when something drips over something, if it's colored, it describes the form. And so often with ceramics, you make something, you dry it, you fire it, you glaze it, you fire it again. That can be a month apart or weeks apart. And it's quite difficult sometimes to join the two, to make the glaze relevant to the surface. And so dripping glazes, I found, is a way to describe form. And so there's a very early starfish pot, which is with the lid, but you can see the yellow dripping down the pot during the firing. I didn't put it there. This is all about glazes dripping and moving. There's a lobster there and a fish here. This is a fruit bowl of the undersea. And here's the dripping on the bottom of Ferdinand's lidded pot. There's a drip at the bottom of that bay leaf there. Bay, which is a symbol of tenacity and dryness, was his favorite plant. And it was all over Waddesdon Manor. And this is how I put the piece in the kiln, and this is how it comes out 2 days later. So the melting of all these different colors painted by hand on the pots. Here they are on their stilts being held with a collector for the drips. This, at the end of the firing, is full of glaze, like a pool, like a lake. And so this is the magic of the changes. That my own indulgence making these pots really shows the transformation, and it's never stopped. There's the tray full of glaze, which has to be knocked off with a hammer after the firing, and my husband Graham polishes the bottoms with an angle grinder. And so the bottom of my pots are often quite scarred. It's unavoidable. But this is the sort of magic that keeps me doing my double days. I do a 15-hour day quite often. I do 10 till 6 with my team in my working studios, and then sort of 8 or 9 till 2 or 3, and then have 7 hours sleep anyway. But I do this double day where I'm working with the team and multitasking and dealing with visitors. And then at night, I have this magical time of making on my own. And this is the running of the glaze. This is the inside of a giant pot. This was a giant pot. And everything running and running and running, which takes us through to running workshops. So it's not all rosy and fabulous, making pots in the midnight hours. Taxes and wage rolls and all sorts of PR with the press and photography and deliveries and stock taking and things. And I run 3 workshops. One was very active in Provence in a cave, which you're going to see in a minute. The main one in London has been very small. I'm sort of not wonderful. I have this fantastic husband who built the studios that we live and work in, and he cooks and makes jam and grows vegetables and looks after our daughter. And really has enabled me to have these long hours at my workbench. And this is about running the studios. This is the London Mews behind Balls Pond Road in the East End of London. Tiny cobbled mews. And we bought very cheaply back in the 80s in an area that was so rough, we found sawn-off shotguns and drug needles and things in this mews, which was a lot rougher than this at the time. And we built this tiny building on the mews and lived in this very small building for 30 years while my husband built around us. And I shared it not for profit with other potters. So we had a giant kiln and worked away. So this is the kiln. My office would have been on the left, everything stashed under desks. And really, I could hear Graham snoring at night upstairs through the floor that he built this studio. And the kitchen, the photographer's actually standing in the entranceway to the kitchen. So it was very tight, very intense, and very inexpensive to run, which meant that I could travel, and very easy to shut up and go away. And here we are again in a glaze room. Sort of over the last 5 or 10 years, really, I've expanded and had more space for the first time in my life. And here I am talking with Erica from Hungary and Marai from Cyprus, she's half from Cyprus, and we're talking about glazes or knotting or something very intensely. And there's the tool trolley, that's really the extent of our tools. And the studio is 5 meters by 5 meters. Again, these potters out there, you don't have to have a big setup. I have a small top-loader kiln there, and it's the most lovely thing. That's the Glaze archive. There's a cinema screen that comes down in front of it. Because it's such a small space, it's very overpowering to have this information on top of you all the time. So we can block it out with this lovely screen. And here we are. This is the physicality of it. This is closing a big pumpkin. There's Graham helping. There's the dustbin that we balance the pumpkin on when we're making it. And there's me looking quite intent, because it's a difficult and physical thing to do. My new team in Kent. We recently sold a building in Hackney, and we bought a historical sort of Agatha Christie type house, 1750 house with beautiful gardens. 4 generations of women planted roses there. We've inherited rose gardens and walled vegetable gardens and things. And these are the new local people that I'm employing as part of my team there. And there's my team in London, all looking quite happy, I'm glad to say. In the tiny space where we glazed this piece, we would have been working for 2 days just glazing that alone, working away. And there's Graham. I don't know if he's gone downstairs to see the dance performance because he's heard me talk so many times. I don't know if he's here, but he's the sort of man behind it all, really. We're very much a creative team. And these are the other studios that we have. We decided we didn't want to bring our daughter up in Hackney, in the pollution, and so we moved mostly. We kept the house in London, and we bought this house here in the south of France, in Provence, for £80,000. It's on 7 floors. It's like a lighthouse. You can see the cliffs behind, and you can see the villages tumbling down. All these houses here are 5 and 7 stories high. So you go in the back door, and you drop down 4 floors and go out the bottom door. And our daughter went to school in this medieval village and was sort of native French, really, till the age of 11, which is a big thing for English. You were so wonderful with your languages, the amount of languages that you speak. But really, you know, for her to be fluent in French, and then we moved to Barcelona and take on Spanish, was something that we really wanted to do for her. And we still have the house. She won't let us sell it, not that we really want to. And we're going there in a month's time to go and see it and hope that the rains haven't come in. But there's a studio in the bottom of it in the raw caves of the village. The village is scattered with caves. It was very big in the resistance during the war because a lot of people could hide in the caves, and there are tunnels between houses and things. But here's the raw stone walls. There's the dog, in again. And this was fantastic because it stayed 19 degrees whether it was summer or winter. I was very afraid when we moved to France. Graham said we were going to Provence to give Scarlett a sort of new fresh air. And I was very worried with the heat that I wouldn't be able to make in the same way as I make. But we found this house with a cave underneath, and we managed to buy it, and Graham restored it. This is the studio in Barcelona, in the Gothic area. We found a little tiny studio, and that's one of my assistants, Enrique, who followed me to London and went through the Royal College of Art and did ceramics and is now showing with my art dealer. There he is about 8 years ago. Actually, it's more. Look, 14. And there's the dog. He's still alive. He's 16. My daughter took him to the vet the other day, and the vet didn't believe her that he was 16, but he is 16. And so we work away. I'm also, I've been very heavily involved with a television program for BBC Two. I'm the judge, one of the judges. And these are the driving personalities behind this thing that has revived ceramics in England to an extraordinary degree. The BBC ran it. It's a competition where they take 10 potters, and they can't be professional. They can't really have sold before, but they're hobby potters. And week by week, they have challenges. So week 1, they have to make a dinner service with a pottery wheel. Week 2, they have to make a porcelain lamp, and they've never used porcelain before. There was one of the challenges, they had to make a toilet that would flush. And we had to teach them about U-bends and things. And there I am, the judge in the center. 3.5 million people watched it while it was being screened. You obviously get these rescreenings on television these days. But it took England by storm. It was absolutely brilliant. And now potters who have a potter's market, people will say, they used to say £10 for this, why? And now they say £10, great, I'll have 6. You know, it's made a huge impact in all areas for people having a go. And I know you have facilities and studios. You have clay station here, where I was talking to the potters last night, and satellite places opening, where it is such a wonderful thing to make ceramics, and also wonderful to use the most beautiful things domestically, and India's waking up to that. After all, when you have a drink, you kiss a cup, so it should be a beautiful cup, and it should be beautiful to use. And so these are the young talents who we judged. It had 2 series with BBC, and after the 2 series, they decided to go to commercial TV. I pulled out because I'm working with a charity to help impoverished children rather than these middle-class makers, and series 3 is running. I know some of you have watched it, I think illegally. It hasn't been screened in England, in India, but I know some of you have managed to get hold of it on YouTube and things like that. It's the best fun, and it got right into the living room of the English public. And this is about dreaming, really. I've been in discussions with various authorities in England to sort of fulfill dreams. And I've been talking with Hyde Park to do a slide or a climbing frame, this giant pumpkin stem, to be made in bronze, not in clay. And this is what I did to illustrate it, to show it. And they're trying to fundraise. It's £120,000 to fundraise for a giant bronze stem in England. And also you have to have planning permission to put things in the royal parks. But this is one of the projects which is bubbling away. Another project of my dreams is to do a giant pot, a storytelling pot, which would be about a place or a city and about the history of a city and the people, of relevance to a city, past, present, and future, actually. And so this is one of my dreams. There are 2 men in their 60s in Scandinavia that you can make. They've made a pot up to 6 meters high for a big expo in Portugal. And you make the pot and they build the kiln around it. Normally you put a pot into a kiln, but they actually build this. I'm really trying to sort of get this through because I know they're going to retire soon. And I don't think anybody else will be able to do it. Although maybe Clay Station can do it. The things that they're doing technologically wouldn't put it past them in years to come. And this is a folly in Stirling in Scotland. You can rent it, I think you can actually stay in it. But this is the sort of thing that to fuse the public art and the architectural work with the fancy pots, if you like. I was recently in discussions with Kew Gardens to do a giant artichoke pavilion and make each artichoke leaf about this big, and we've quantified it and costed it to to make it. They did have beautiful pavilions in Kew Garden at one stage, and so we're trying to get that back in. Who knows if they'll ever work, because you just have to dream and you have to aspire to things. And these are my heroes. This is my great pottery teacher, Mo Jupp, who taught thousands of English potters through the 70s and 80s and 90s. He died a couple of years ago, and he taught 1 day a week in each university, which were very spread out in England. He used to drive in this old van and arrive and be like an incredible teacher and a great guru to many makers. And so I'm showing him to pay homage to what he taught me, to be true to the material. And Zandra Rhodes, the fashion designer, Dame Zandra Rhodes, a great character. She's nearly 80. She's worse than me. She says, I can't phone her between midnight and 3 a.m. The rest of the time I can call her and speak to her. We're going to Paris next week to a gala dinner at the Musée des Arts Décoratifs, and she's guest of honor at this big dinner. And she's really a great inspiration. There's the pattern on her. There's the pattern on her clothes. This was just sitting in her home, in her penthouse in London. But there's the pattern that relates to the body and the form. And this is Andrew Logan, who's a good friend of hers, a great surreal sculptor in England, who's great fun. And both of them very influenced by India. I think possibly some of the draw of India for Graham and I when we first started was really the fact that they have been very influenced by them. So they're kind of my gurus, really, which you'll have to have. And here we are. Look at my ridiculous hat, which actually was made by one of London's top, it's not ridiculous, Sorry Piers, one of London's top hat makers, and he also made my daughter Scarlett's lovely acorn cup hat. And here we are at Buckingham Palace. Who'd have thought it, from my rough, comprehensive school, that ceramics can actually be recognised? I got an MBE last November the 7th. We went to Buckingham Palace. There's my father on the right, looking very pleased at me, I'm very glad to say. You have to wear a hat when you go to the palace. It's very much preferred. And so we had these hats. We had a fantastic day. But really, it's sort of recognizing that ceramics, and I got the MBE not for my own work in particular, but for contribution to the field, because all my research is made available to the field, and I have this dear community of makers, and I never say no to students coming to visit. We have visit Thursdays where people come and have lunchtime forums and things. And so I'm very pleased to have been recognized for that. But in effect, it's not really that I'm gloating that I have this beautiful medal in my drawer at home. It's essentially to recognize ceramics and craft to be really essential part of our everyday lives. And there are two women in England, Lisa Hammond, who opened a little clay college, and a charity called Adopt a Potter, trying to keep potters' skills preserved by passing them on to young people. And she and I have both had MBEs. So it's just the most wonderful thing, really. I don't know how I'm doing for time, Petiti. How are we doing? Great. So really, we've got extra entertainment today. Here we are, back to the stuff itself. You know, to transform that would have cost £5. I use a very expensive clay. Porcelain's expensive. This is a sort of manipulated porcelain, and I would have turned it into something more valuable than that. And that's the beauty of craft and the hand, and really, and the dog hair, of course. And really, it's that which is really exciting. This is what I made at school, age 12, with my pottery teacher, who passed away last month, actually, Mr. Evely. And you can see it's quite similar to the things that I make now. You know, all the potters out there, we were talking last night about you have a language, a visual language of inspiration, and your skills are your alphabet to which you can communicate with people. And really, these are very similar to the things that I make now. They're a shape that's been dressed up. Age 12, it's sort of deeply in the way that I work. And this is the last piece that I made before we set off for India. It finished on January the 30th. And it's the first fully porcelain pineapple that I've made to help fundraise for a charity called Onside that I'm an ambassador for. So I'm hoping it's going to raise lots of money so we can equip some after-school clubs with kilns and staff for a year to get kids having a go from very poor backgrounds. And so that was the first pots that I ever made, and these are the most recent. And I have a surprise. So I had this there was a man called Derek Clarkson, and he was an old man who was, what's the new name for physically challenged? There's a new name. Differently differently able. He was differently able man, a lovely man, and he wrote an article 30 years ago in a ceramic magazine about crystalline glazes. And I read this article. He very generously put his recipes in the article. I then wrote to him and said, can I please come and study with you? Of course you can. So doors open. My husband and I drove up the next month to Lancashire, and he showed me everything, all his notebooks, all his techniques. He was so generous. And he also, whenever he gave a lecture himself, he gave a present to one of the audience. So I've got a present here that I've been carrying around India for 3 weeks in my suitcase. And one of you, under your chair, before you all get up and excitedly to see if you can find a card that's sellotaped under your chair, that I have a gift for you and a poster here. We're going to have a question and answer session, I hope. And then after that, we've got this fabulous film. So our last 3 weeks, we went to see the Agastya Foundation, which is this incredible educational foundation for village children outside Bangalore, just by the Kolar goldfields. And they have a hub, but they have 1,000 buses that go out to villages and teach children in a very inspired and creative way. So we went there, and I did classes there. We zoomed down to Kanyakumari, and I worked with village potters. And then we worked our way back out the coast to see the Teyam. And then, and in fact, Keithan is here as the representative of the people who made the film. Wave, Keithan, so people can get you after he's in a lovely apricot-coloured shirt. We went to Bangalore, and we were honoured to be shown the Albuquerque factory and the Commonwealth factory of the most wonderful terracotta tile production that's been going on since 1865, when the missionaries came and opened this factory, and then 3 years later another factory was opened. And really, that's the most extraordinary factory. You're going to see a film about it as a bonus to this evening, really. It's a very abstract film. It's sort of documentary, but at the same time, it's very open-ended, because in fact, the factories are they're your heritage, and they're the most extraordinary places, but they really I don't know where they're going to go as far as fitting ceramics into architecture, for example. There are architects amongst you here, us here, I think, and really look at the architecture, the majority of it in Bangalore. You know, it's not fabulous, although of course there are shining examples, but really it's calling out. This young couple who made this film, they're calling out to architects and to people to recognize the value of the heritage and the value of clay, which is a timeless thing. It goes across centuries and really should move forward into centuries. It breathes, it keeps buildings cool, it's beautiful, and it's alive. You know, so it's a very, very interesting time, I think, for these factories. So the film is very open, actually, and quite strange at the end. Although, if you don't mind me saying so, Keithan, you didn't make it. But it's very interesting, and I hope you'll sit and watch that. So please have a little stretch of your legs and see if you have a card taped underneath your seat. So I'd like to give you a gift. Yeah, somebody's found it. I'm going to open it and show it to everybody. Maybe you'll show it to people if we have a repose afterwards. So it's a ring box. Anybody got any questions? Please don't be shy. Yes, there's somebody back there.
I wanted to ask you about clay, since you're a scientist and an artist. There's an interesting, regarding also what you were talking about architecture, clay can be used with moss, so you have breathing walls.
Yes.
If somewhere along the line you do some research and collaborate with people to do it on a large scale, it'd be really wonderful with climate change and other things that are happening right now.
Absolutely. So the comment was that clay can be mixed with moss. So you're talking about raw clay or fired clay? I think fired clay. Yeah, so, well, obviously the age-old houses. So you have this wondrous stuff that makes knives and makeup and toothpaste and medicine when you have an upset stomach, and sculptures and houses and drains and tiles for the wall, tiles for the floor, roof tiles, bricks and everything. And the age-old thing is unfired clay, which is adobe. The whole of South America, all the houses are unfired clay, which is essentially walls of raw clay that are dried by the sun, that breathe, keep houses cool in the heat, and protect you in the rain, although they have to be replenished. And then you have fired brick, in fact, which is the bricks that are made in Bangalore. In fact, this young couple who made the film have designed a little brick with 3 holes in, and they built the offices for the Commonwealth Tile Company. And as we walked into these, they persuaded the owners of the factory to spend their money on these new offices that are very aesthetically beautiful. They look very traditional, and very refined, yet they're very simple. It was very inexpensive to build. And we went in, and it was cool in there. And in fact, from the mortar, which I think is lime mortar, isn't it, Keith? And there were ferns growing. So it was like a living wall, actually. And the people have commented that they haven't had to install air conditioning because it's such an intelligent building. It's quite thick walls that retain the cool. And so, yes, absolutely, in Kerala, it's hard to get clay because when you take clay away from the fields and the surface clay, it stops them growing rice. So it's very hard, for instance. But in other places, in Karnataka, I think it's very clay rich. You get primary and secondary clays. But essentially, yes, absolutely. The brick under compression, the skyscrapers in America before steel, they had very tall buildings made of brick that withstand compression. Clay doesn't withstand stress, it'll snap if it's cantilevered and there's weight on it. But if it's compressed, it's just the most wonderful material. And you can use it unfired, you can use it low-fired. This brick has been low-fired. And so really, and it's so beautiful. It's so variated. Of course, there was this movement away from that because it looks kind of rough, and everybody likes, with the weather, especially in India, and how concrete weathers. Oh, concrete's such a monster. And it weathers badly and everything, but clay weathers beautifully. And so, yes, I appeal to you all, architects out there, to think of it as a material. In England, they're actually cladding steel and concrete and wooden structures with pretend bricks. It's a bit weird. But then it's practical. I think it's to do with insulation. So they're really keeping the beauty of it. It's a sort of surface brick. It's like a tile almost. But they're really looking at coloured clays from all over the world, fired with ecological fuels. In fact, the Albuquerque factory is using cashew nut waste. It's not deforesting, it's not using wood to fire. So there are ways around it, and it is the most wonderful material. Any of you wanting to build a new building, be it tiny, be it big, please think about clay and brick, because it is wondrous. Are you an architect? Any architects here, hands up? Great. A few, yes. I was hoping there might be a few. Any other questions? Or comments? It doesn't have to be a question. It can be something that's... Yes, there's one over here. Are you going over to that lady?
Sorry. No,
yes,
go
no,
ahead.
You go first, and then we'll take it over there.
Now, I've noticed that you've used the motif of the pumpkin
Yes.
in a lot of your work. And we've seen this motif all over Southeast Asia, in Bali, in Thailand, in Burma. What is with the pumpkin?
Well, it's fascinating, isn't it? And in fact, in Mexico and in South America, it's huge. Well, it's the most beautiful thing, isn't it? It's a symbol of fecundity and full fertility, obviously, because it's like a bosom or a bottom or a very plump and fecund, full, ripe thing. So there's that. But there are Chinese 16th century pumpkins that have inspired me. And they're, as you say, they're all over the East. And, I don't know if you've grown a pumpkin before, but when you grow a pumpkin, it's the most extraordinary thing. There are these big leaves, and it's very gangly, and then all of a sudden, this great, beautiful thing. You see fields of pumpkins in the Canary Islands. I went to see them. And the blue pumpkins in upstate America and in Australia. It's a timeless and universal thing. It's beautiful to eat. Its form is beautiful. It's easy to grow. In fact, it grows on wasteland. So I suppose I feel that ceramics, I connect. I'm lucky enough to go behind the scenes in the major museums, and I was shown a Roman pot recently, and I put my hand inside, and there was the maker's thumbprint. And really, he was communicating. I presume it was a he, it could have been a she. I'd like to think that there were women potters communicating across time and across countries with another maker. And so that clay is so immediate. And I suppose fruits and vegetables have existed all these times. So there they are in the fields, and they're such a beautiful shape to enjoy and make. And actually a fruit is a vessel for energy. A pineapple is a holder of juice, if you like, or an orange is a holder of juice. So a pot is a holder of liquid, a vessel is. In fact, in Chinese culture, to be called an empty pot is a very great privilege, because it means you're there and you're ready to receive friendship and knowledge. There's space for you to receive things. And so there's all these things. You know, the pumpkin is this great volume thing. It's like a woman, but it's also this miracle growing in waste ground. So it crosses time. It's just the most precious thing that I can't stop making them. I made a huge one. A woman asked me to make a giant one for her husband to surprise him when he opened the curtains on their ruby wedding anniversary. And she planted, she was a very wealthy lady, and she had a ruby made set in the end of the stem for him to have by the swimming pool, this giant pumpkin. And she sent her private jet to collect this giant pumpkin that went, and the pumpkin went up a conveyor belt into this jet and was whisked off. You know, down to tiny ones. I made little tiny ones. On the top of Alice, you notice there would have been pumpkins. Because really, I think it's, you know, the most wonderful thing.
Thank you.
Is a pumpkin a metaphor of the womb?
Of the womb, it very well could be, yeah. Yeah, absolutely. South American, there's a lot of pumpkins with little babies and, you know, yeah, absolutely.
And the cucina, what are the storytelling dolls, the board?
Yes, yes, absolutely. And it's across time and across space that's so amazing. There was a lady there in the red shirt.
Thank you for such a fascinating narration. My question is directed to your journey as an artist with clay. Growing up in the Indian subcontinent, across India, one is always taught, the early learning given to us is be like clay, absorb. So my question as an artist is, does the technique always, what's your relationship with the medium clay?
Yeah.
While it's malleable, does it always transcribe as stencil, or do you learn back from clay? What's that process like?
That's very interesting, because ceramics has all these different parts. You make something, and then it has to be dried and fired, and there are these processes, and then you have to sell it. Hardest thing is selling something. Making something's quite easy. But the best part is the soft clay. It responds to touch, and it gives back. It's a meditation to make something out of clay. All of you, I appeal to you to find a handful of clay and enjoy feeling it in your hands. And as you use it, as you play with it, it dries and it changes and it challenges you all the time. Personally, I find it, you know, it does not suffer a fall. I recently made a huge mistake, a pot that made 12 of us. We worked for 2 months on all the pieces, and it was really, really tight. And I fired it too early. It was wet. I was rushing for a deadline for my art dealer. And, you know, even though after 30 years where you think you know, it challenges to not know. And also because it's so diverse. The spaceships that fly closest to the sun, the satellites that fly, the one material that's on the tip of those spaceships to resist the heat from the sun is ceramics. You know, and they make it's the most extraordinary material. And for that reason, it's ever challenging to learn and to use it. And so that's my art. It's just, I'm infatuated. Apart from my daughter and my husband, it's the next best thing in life. Yes, there's a question here at the front here. Oh, yes, no, we can. Yes, we can. Doesn't matter who has it because we can answer both questions. Thank you.
Thank you for letting us into your world, because that's been really fascinating. I was wondering if you were planning to do a masterclass here in Bangalore.
Well, I did one last night. I'm so sorry. But it won't be the last one because I have Clay Station is a commercial place that teaches people on a rooftop on the other side of Bangalore. It also is a clay supplier and it makes clay and it's learning to make glazes and it's ever growing. And I have this lovely relation. It's like a family. It's like the heart of the potters, I think, or a lot of them in Bangalore. And I was there last night, and actually it's very difficult to give a masterclass because it takes me a month to make something. I can't, a lot of potters can show when it's done. So last night I was a bit nervous because I showed all the little things that I've learned about how to hold a tool or how to stand and how the clay changes and just little tips. And I'll be doing it again, so please get in touch with Clay Station for next time. But also online, I have on YouTube, I have lots of films. On my website, if you dig deep into my website, I've got all my sketchbooks and techniques and films made by different people. And on Instagram, yeah, I use it as an educational tool. So often there's shows a pot being made. And so really, in a way, I sort of communicate across the world through social media to show things. But yeah, I find it so hard. I much prefer speaking about my philosophy of community and clay than making, but you just have to have a go. Are you doing it? Are you a potter?
Yes, I started a couple of years ago,
Great.
and I'm passionately in love.
I warn you, if you ever go and have a go, you get addicted.
Mm-hmm.
It's worse than hardcore Class A drugs, I think. Thank you.
Kate, what's your advice for aspiring ceramic artists?
That's Ganeshan from Clay Station. And I'm really impressed. Last time I was here 6 years ago, he showed me his production unit last night and his research unit. So pleased you're here, Ganesh. Aspiring potters, well, you have to develop tenacity, perseverance, and endurance as the first thing. So also be very open when you make something to it not being how you think it's going to be, but keeping your eyes open as to what it becomes. By not being afraid to make mistakes and take the material and the glaze too far, and not be too upset, but to salvage knowledge from and move forward with that. For every glaze test that you do, 20 glaze tests, there may be one glaze test that has a seed of interest. I believe you have Dolly 27 or something like that. One, it's one that just pings at you. Pull that like a thread from a sweater coming. Pull it and tease it out and tease the knowledge. And really just, they say it's 2,000 hours to be good at your subject and 10,000 hours to be a master. So put your time in, learn by your mistakes, and focus and concentrate and enjoy it. Because when you enjoy it, it shows in the work. It cannot be, but don't be put off and really have tenacity to follow something right through. Glazing, the hardest thing. I find it really hard. And you can ruin a fabulous pot with a bad glaze. You can actually make a not very good pot wonderful with a good glaze. So really, it's paying attention to all levels of it. And I know in India, it's unglazed terracotta. It's unglazed things that you're used to. And so, you're at the dawning of the age of studio pottery. And I know glazes are something that Clay Station are concentrating on developing and learning about in depth. So it's just persevering, and it's not a quick fix. It really isn't. But it is a quick fix to just hold it. That's the nice thing. There was a lady here who you had a question, didn't you? Somebody here? No? Yes?
I just wondered what the crystals in the glazing look like, but I thought you said the ring ball had it, so I would love to see it.
Yes, you can't really see it in a photograph. You have to see it. So do pass it all the way back, as long as it comes back to this lovely lady in the white shirt. Please do share it around. And the question was about the crystals. Yeah, they're physical crystals that grow. In childhood chemistry experiments with copper sulfate, you can grow crystals. If you don't move, you seed a crystal. And it's done in the matrix at the glaze at very high temperatures. It's actually super saturation of solution during the cooling. And for some of you who've made fudge or toffee, when you overboil sugar and water together, it crystallizes out because the solution is super saturated. And this is overboiling zinc, creating woolomite crystals at high temperatures. And they only grow as the pot cools between about 1,100 and 1,000 degrees. And so the glaze has to move, find seeds, the crystals grow and grow. So there's a man in America who holds the kiln around 1100 for 3 weeks. And he grows crystals. He has a plate, and the crystal's like this size across. Amazing. It's not really my cup of tea. I like the crystals to sort of be a second level of interest rather than the thing that hits you in the face. But really, it's just, it's a fascinating... And if you go on YouTube or whatever and put crystalline glazes, it's all over the world. There's people hooked by them, to varying degrees. Yes. I met you last night, didn't I?
Yeah. Hi, Kate. So my question is, I'm very intrigued with your journey around the Europe. You said you've been in Barcelona and in France also. How did you manage that? I mean, how did you manage both the finances, finding the spot, and selling your wear there?
Yes, well, you have to have faith to start with. I had an art dealer. We moved to France knowing that my art dealer would take everything that I make. So I had to make it and get it to him. And we were in a medieval village where the electricity current wasn't strong enough to fire to my high temperatures of crystals. So I would make in the village, fire to biscuit, put it in my car or find somebody driving to London, get it, pack it, send it to London, fly to London following it, unpack it, glaze it in my good kilns in London, and then send it to my art dealer. And how did I manage it? My husband is a builder. My husband, is he here? Is he gone? He's dedicated the 37 years that we've been together to enabling me to make, really, and to encourage other people to make. So he's always been there. He's a builder. If everything went wrong, he could have turned back to building and making things, but he built the houses that we live in, and he maintains the gardens and house that we've just bought. So really, it's just having blind faith, really, in a lot of ways. We moved. I didn't know if it was going to work, but I thought, well, we can always go back. We kept our home in London, a very small home, and we let other people use it. My students were using it in my absence, and people were renting a space upstairs in our absence. So we just managed, My husband was the one who said we had to take Scarlett. I was very happy in London. Everything was very easy. It got a lot more complicated. But he said there was a whole new world of friends and things to learn and people to see, and he sort of forced us to do that. And I'm very glad that he very much did. I was quite relieved when our daughter, aged 13, said she didn't know if she was French, Spanish, or English and wanted to go back to London. We did go back. But, we had these 9 years of wandering and just managing. But really, it was amazing Graham. He's gone. And really amazing Adrian Sassoon, my art dealer, because I'd been working for 14 years establishing myself with him. And so he, guaranteed really to buy work. So I didn't go, hippie-happy. There was that security behind me. But you can take small steps. The studios were tiny. Barcelona, I shared a space with 6 other makers. And I went to IKEA and bought a trestle table and just started working. So, yeah. Any other questions? Does that answer your question? Yeah.
Hi, Kate.
Oh, hi.
As an artist, when you make something, do you have an expectation of how the audience will respond to it? And does that expectation differ, and how do you respond when that expectation differs?
Yes, that's very interesting, actually, because sometimes I make something, and I have this Spanish assistant, Enrico. He always says, "This will sell." And I go, really? Do you think it's going to sell? Because I've really pushed it out. So I have my pineapples and my pumpkins, and they're things that I know really eventually will sell. So there's that sort of baseline of security. But then I have these making holidays where I really make things, and my art dealer doesn't know quite what I'm going to provide him with. And you just have to have, again, to the other lady's answer, a sort of blind faith. There are pots that I've sent out that I thought would be fabulous and sell quickly haven't. And the ones that I think are so brave that they're almost ugly, then they go, and the people love them and give them a home. It's the most ultimate thing for somebody to buy a piece, especially at the prices of my work now, and to love it and hold it. And people say, do I mind letting go of them? And of course I don't, because A, I'm paid, so I can pay all my team and look after us. But at the same time, they're still mine, actually, but they're looking after them. So I'm not sure if that answers your question, but I do feel that there's brave times and there are safe times. And a lot of my friends won't make, I don't think that's a compromise. I think that's a reality. So the little piece that I gave the lady, you know, originally, I don't make them anymore, actually. I have a box of about 15 that are left that are diminishing at each talk. I made that originally to sort of know that if I was to sell 5 a week, I would have this baseline. And that's a craft. That's very interesting because you said I'm an artist. I kind of think I'm an artisan. People can call it art if they like, but I call it decorative arts and studio pottery. And I don't know, it's just a fascinating thing that people will, and you just have to step out there and show it, and show it, and show it. It's harder to sell something than it is to make it. Be brave, take risks. It doesn't matter if people don't buy it and you have to have it at home and in your garden or whatever, or give it to your brothers. My family have got houses full of my average ones. It's terrible, you know, because the great ones have to go. Does that answer your question? I'm not sure if it does. Somebody last night, this very nice man, said he doesn't have faith that people will like his work. But what can you lose? You just get it out there, and if it doesn't work, you just maybe adapt and do something else. Is that being untrue to your artistic spirit? Some fine artist would say yes. I don't think it is. I want to make a livelihood, and I love making the ring boxes. It's not that I didn't love making them. I'd never make something I didn't want to make.
I had a question. You spoke about unglazed pottery and what you'd seen in India. Have you traveled? You must have traveled in China too.
No, I haven't been to China, no.
Because, you know, there is a dynasty in Chinese history, the Tang dynasty, and which has a lot of glazed pottery, which depicts the Silk Road, the camels, the fat ladies.
Yes.
Being fat and a lady in the Tang period was kind of the zenith of being beautiful.
Yes.
And
Thank heavens.
you have beautifully glazed pottery, which is 7th century AD.
Yes.
And so I just thought I'd mention that.
The camels and the horses, yes.
Yes, the camels and the horses and the traders.
And in
the
fact, they
Silk
have naked areas, don't they, as well, of the bare clay, and then they have the drips of the glaze.
Yes, yeah, and beautiful colors.
Yes. And in fact, the colors are just the same.
Exactly.
That's what's so amazing. The copper, the cobalt, the iron, the manganese, the vanadium, the ilmenite. We just passed ilmenite mines in Kerala. You know, they're the same, and they've always have been. So really, it's just so lovely that the cobalt blue is the same. In fact, actually, there are more beautiful colors sometimes from the past because they use lead. Now we're preventing lead-enhanced color. But in fact, it dissolves into food and makes you go mad. To go potty, that's where the word comes from.
Absolutely.
But I haven't been to China, but I do have friends who deal in the finest Chinese that I see at these art fairs where I exhibit amongst antiques.
Yes.
And they love to get me, but while the fair is closed, and let me hold them and study them. And they have those whole towns, don't they, with little houses and steps and whole landscapes, fantasies. Yeah,
that's right.
Thank you for
And
that.
talking of cobalt, and you must have seen the blue and white pottery from Multan, which is now in Pakistan.
Yes.
And which also we do in Jaipur and in parts of
Delhi
Rajasthan.
blue.
Yes.
Yes.
So, and you can find the Multan blue and whites in British auctions even today.
Absolutely, yes.
They're just beautiful shapes and the flowers and
I
the
know.
color of the blue.
I mean, I'm amazed when you look at auctions how much stuff we've been making. Potters have been making for forever. You know, it's such amazing, and they're still bringing up shipwrecks full of the blue and white Delftware and things. But, you know, there's cobalt being used all over the world, and still now, you know. I've just bought a dinner service in porcelain by an old man with paintings of animals, and it's cobalt blue and white. You know, it's timeless. So, we've got to pull together and show this amazing film.
Thank you, sir.
Keithan, I'm going to put you on the spot. Would you like to just, well, actually, I won't put you on the spot because it's a show. But afterwards, if any of you are interested to know about the Mangalore Tales, Keithan is the representative of the young couple who made this film with an English filmmaker. Are we going to run it now, Pratiti?
Thank you, Kate.
Unusual film, I have to admit. But the fact is that my husband read the fact the other day that the most material on this planet, the most material that exists in tonnage is concrete. You know, that is the most above all other materials. And really, we have this clay. You've seen a sense of dereliction, although these factories are still going, and some of you will be living under these wonderful tiled roofs, you know, with their lovely inserts. But really, it's it's shocking, I think. There's enough clay for us to use it, and that these factories don't quite know how to move forward. They're running along on a shoestring, and you've seen the situation there. So it's an interesting thing, an abstract thought. It's good to finish things with an open mind to things, but do please support clay in any way that you can. And I know Pratiti wanted to say something, and thank you all for coming today. I think that's it.